I'm pregnant! I can't have children.
The sound of shattering Bohemian crystal echoed through the cavernous dining room of Oakhaven Manor, freezing the blood in Lady Beatrice's veins. Fragments of glass rained down upon the Persian rug like glittering diamonds. "I'm pregnant," she had just whispered, her cheeks flushed with a tentative, hopeful joy. But the man sitting across the mahogany table, Arthur Pendleton, the formidable Duke of Somerset, did not leap up to embrace her. His face contorted into a mask of pure, terrifying rage. His knuckles turned white as he stood, the silence ringing in the aftermath of the crash. "You lying harlot," he snapped, his voice a low, lethal hiss. "I cannot have children." Welcome back to Timeless Whispers, where we uncover the most scandalous, heartbreaking, and shocking true stories hidden behind the velvet curtains of high society. In the winter of 1884, the sprawling estate of Oakhaven Manor was entirely swallowed by a bitter, unrelenting frost. It was a fitting reflection of the marriage between Arthur Pendleton, the Duke of Somerset, and his new, much younger bride, Lady Beatrice Whitmore. Their union was not forged in the fires of romance, but in the cold, hard ledger books of high society. Beatrice's father, Lord Henry Whitmore, had gambled away the family's modest fortune on poor maritime investments and the card tables of London's notorious gentlemen's clubs. Faced with absolute ruin and the prospect of debtor's prison, Lord Henry practically sold his 19-year-old daughter to the Duke. Arthur Pendleton was a man who commanded a room, not with his voice, but with his oppressive, brooding presence. At 34, he was strikingly handsome, with sharp, aristocratic features and piercing slate-gray eyes that seemed to dissect everyone he looked upon. Yet, there was an undeniable shadow hanging over him. He walked with a slight, rigid stiffness, a lingering ghost of a severe bout of scarlet fever he had suffered in his youth. The illness had nearly claimed his life when he was 18, and though he survived, it had left him permanently altered, hardening his heart to stone. Beatrice arrived at Oakhaven with a trunk full of silk dresses she couldn't afford and a heart heavy with dread. She was a gentle creature, characterized by her cascading auburn hair and a quiet, observant intelligence that most men of her era fatally underestimated. She knew her duty: provide an heir, manage the estate's domestic affairs, and remain unseen when not required. But the reality of her marriage was far colder than she had anticipated. Arthur provided her with every luxury diamonds imported from Amsterdam, thoroughbred horses to ride, and a small army of servants, but he offered her no affection. They slept in separate wings of the vast, drafty manor. Weeks would pass where their only interaction was a stiff, formal nod from opposite ends of a dining table that could seat 40. However, the suffocating ice between them briefly thawed during the Duke's annual winter masquerade ball. It was a tradition Arthur despised but maintained for the sake of political appearances. The manor was transformed into a dizzying wonderland of gaslight, hothouse orchids, and swirling silk. Beatrice wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, her face obscured by a silver Venetian mask adorned with peacock feathers. For the first time since her arrival, the anonymity of the mask seemed to embolden her. Arthur, disguised merely by a plain black domino mask that failed to hide his severe jawline, watched her dance with a succession of nameless lords. Something unfamiliar flared in his chest, a possessive, primal heat. Near midnight, escaping the suffocating heat of the ballroom, Beatrice slipped into the Duke's private library, seeking a moment of quiet. She was startled to find Arthur already there, standing by the crackling hearth, a glass of expensive French cognac in his hand. Without the prying eyes of the London elite, stripped of their usual rigid formalities by the intoxicating atmosphere and the champagne, a strange vulnerability passed between them. Arthur stepped forward, the firelight catching the silver threads in her mask. He reached out, his gloved hand tracing the line of her jaw. For the first time, his touch was not an obligation, but a question. Beatrice leaned into his palm, starved for human warmth. That night, the separate wings of Oakhaven Manor were bridged. It was a night of breathless, unexpected passion, a collision of two lonely souls desperately seeking solace in the dark. In the morning, Arthur was gone before Beatrice awoke, the bedsheets cold beside her. The iron wall between them snapped back into place instantly. Arthur reverted to his stoic, unapproachable self, leaving Beatrice to wonder if the night in his chambers had merely been a fever dream. 2 months passed. The winter snow melted into the damp, muddy beginnings of an English spring. But the atmosphere inside Oakhaven remained frostbitten. Beatrice threw herself into her duties, organizing charity luncheons and managing the household ledgers, trying to bury the memory of that single night of intimacy. But her own body soon refused to be ignored. It began subtly. The rich scent of roasted venison during dinner, a dish she usually favored, suddenly made her stomach violently rebel. Then came the profound, bone-deep exhaustion that kept her confined to her bed until noon. Her trusted lady's maid, Clara Higgins, a sharp-witted woman who had served the Whitmore family for decades, before accompanying Beatrice to Oakhaven, was the first to notice the physical changes. Clara saw the way Beatrice's corsets no longer fit, the sudden bloom in her cheeks, and the missed cycle. "My lady," Clara whispered one morning, carefully pulling a tortoiseshell comb through Beatrice's hair. "If I may be so bold, when was your last course?" Beatrice's reflection in the vanity mirror went pale. Her hands dropped to her lower abdomen, a gesture of instinctual protection. She swore Clara to absolute secrecy. Desperate for confirmation, Beatrice disguised herself in a plain wool cloak and slipped out of the manor's servant entrance, trudging through the mud to the nearby village of Briarwood. There, she sought out Mrs. Edith Gable, an elderly midwife known for her discretion. In a cramped, herb-scented cottage, Mrs. Gable confirmed Beatrice's suspicions. She was indeed with child. Walking back to the manor, Beatrice felt a dizzying concoction of terror and overwhelming joy. An heir. She was carrying the future Duke of Somerset. Surely, she thought, this was the miracle they needed. This child would be the bridge that would permanently shatter the ice around Arthur's heart. She spent 3 days preparing herself for the revelation, dreaming of the moment Arthur's stoic facade would finally break into a smile. She chose to tell him during a private supper in the intimate family dining room. The table was set with the finest silver and illuminated by a sprawling silver candelabra. Arthur sat opposite her, casually swirling a dark ruby port in his favorite Bohemian crystal glass, a rare, intricate piece imported from Prague. Beatrice took a trembling breath, pushing her untouched plate of quail away. "Arthur," she began, her voice soft but steady. He didn't look up from his ledger. "Yes, Beatrice? I have visited the village today. I saw Mrs. Gable." Arthur finally raised his eyes, his brow furrowing. "The midwife? Are you unwell? I will summon Dr. Arbuthnot from London immediately." "No," Beatrice said quickly, a brilliant, nervous smile breaking across her face. "No, Arthur, I am not ill. I am pregnant." For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to stop spinning. The grandfather clock in the corner ceased its ticking. Arthur's face went perfectly, deathly slack. He looked at her, not with the shock of a joyous father, but with the dawning horror of a man witnessing a murder. Then, his arm whipped forward in a blur of motion. The heavy Bohemian crystal glass left his hand, flying across the table and smashing violently against the stone mantelpiece, just inches from Beatrice's head. The explosion of glass sounded like a gunshot. Red port wine splattered against the pale wallpaper like fresh blood. Beatrice screamed, throwing her hands up to protect her face. Arthur stood up, his chair toppling over with a heavy thud. His chest heaved, his eyes burning with a manic, devastating fury. "You lying, treacherous harlot," he snarled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying acoustic power. "Arthur, what is the matter with you?" Beatrice cried, tears of shock springing to her eyes. "It is your child!" From the night of the masquerade. Do not insult my intelligence, Arthur roared, slamming both hands onto the mahogany table. Do not dare play the innocent victim, Beatrice. I know exactly what you are, and I know that the bastard growing inside you is not mine. It cannot be mine. I cannot have children! Beatrice stared at him, utterly paralyzed. What? What are you saying? Arthur paced the room like a caged panther, his breathing ragged. When I was 18, the fever nearly took me. Dr. Phineas Arbuthnot, the finest physician in London, treated me. When the fever broke, he performed a thorough examination. The damage was irreversible, Beatrice. I am sterile. The doctor assured my father of it. I am completely, medically incapable of siring an heir. He stopped pacing and leveled a finger at her, his eyes wild with betrayal. I accepted you into my home. I paid your father's disgraceful debts. And how do you repay me? By opening your legs to another man and trying to pass off his bastard as the heir to the Somerset dukedom. No, Arthur, I swear on my life, there has been no one else, Beatrice sobbed, dropping to her knees. Liar, he shouted, and I know exactly who the father is. Do you think I am blind? Do you think I did not see the way he looked at you during his visit? Arthur was referring to his own cousin, Lord William Cavendish. William was everything. Arthur was not charming, reckless, perpetually smiling, and devastatingly handsome. He had stayed at Oakhaven for 3 weeks shortly before the masquerade ball. During that time, he had often accompanied Beatrice on horseback rides, making her laugh in the gardens, treating her with a warmth that Arthur had never managed. William was a friend, Beatrice pleaded, her voice cracking. He was merely showing me kindness when my own husband would not even look at me. He showed you enough kindness to fill your belly, it seems, Arthur spat, his voice turning lethally cold. You are confined to your quarters, madam. You will not leave this house. You will not send any letters. I will have the truth. And then I will ruin you both. By morning, Oakhaven Manor had transformed from a gilded cage into a maximum security prison. Beatrice was locked within her private suite, guarded by 2 burly footmen who had strict orders from the Duke. No one enters, no one leaves, save for Clara Higgins, who was thoroughly searched every time she brought a tray of food. The scandal was ruthlessly contained from the outside world, but within the servants' halls, the whispers spread like wildfire. The Duchess was with child, and the Duke wanted her head. Arthur wasted no time. He was a man accustomed to absolute control, and this betrayal had unhinged him. Believing the local constabulary to be too incompetent and prone to gossip, he sent a telegraph to London, securing the services of Mr. Josiah Flint. Flint was a private detective of unparalleled repute, a former Scotland Yard inspector who now specialized in the discreet, dirty secrets of the aristocracy. Flint arrived 2 days later, a quiet, unassuming man in a gray tweed suit, possessing the sharp, predatory eyes of a hawk. He immediately set to work, turning Oakhaven upside down. He interrogated the staff, cross-referenced the manor's guest logs, and meticulously reconstructed the timeline of William Cavendish's visit. Trapped in her room, Beatrice felt she was losing her mind. She paced the length of her Persian rug until her feet blistered. She replayed the night of the masquerade in her head 1,000 times. She knew, with the absolute, unwavering certainty of a mother, that the child was Arthur's. There had been no one else. The very thought of William Cavendish in an intimate light made her skin crawl. He was pleasant, yes, but he was a notorious rake who smelled of cheap gin and gambling halls. But how could she fight the medical decree of Dr. Phineas Arbuthnot? Arbuthnot was a titan of Victorian medicine, physician to royalty. If he said Arthur was sterile, the world would believe him over the desperate pleas of a disgraced young wife. On the 4th day of her confinement, Clara smuggled in a small, crumpled piece of parchment beneath a silver tea dome. "From the village, my lady," Clara whispered, her eyes darting nervously to the heavy oak door. A boy brought it to the kitchen. Beatrice unfolded the note with trembling hands. It was hastily scrawled, the handwriting messy and frantic. "B. I received word of Arthur's madness. Say nothing. I am coming back to Oakhaven to sort this out. W.C." William was returning. Beatrice's heart sank. His arrival would only pour kerosene on the raging fire of Arthur's paranoia. If William came charging in, playing the chivalrous knight, Arthur would kill him. The very next afternoon, a carriage thundered up the gravel driveway. From her window, Beatrice watched William Cavendish leap out before the carriage had even fully stopped. He was immediately intercepted by Josiah Flint and 4 armed estate guards. They dragged him into Arthur's private study. Though she couldn't hear the words, Beatrice could hear the sheer volume of the roaring men below. Hours passed. Then, the sound of heavy boots echoed down her corridor. The locks on her door clicked, and Arthur walked in, flanked by the detective, Mr. Flint. Arthur held a piece of pale blue stationery in his hand, his expression triumphant and terrible. "It is over, Beatrice," Arthur said, his voice void of all emotion. Mr. Flint conducted a thorough search of William's townhouse in London before intercepting him here. Flint stepped forward, holding up a small, velvet-lined mahogany box. Beatrice recognized it immediately. It was the jewelry box she kept on her vanity, the one Arthur had given her on their wedding day. "We found this hidden in Lord Cavendish's private safe," Flint stated, his tone thoroughly professional and devoid of pity. Arthur threw the blue stationery onto the bed. Beatrice picked it up. Her blood ran cold. It was a letter, written in a handwriting that flawlessly mimicked her own looping cursive. "My dearest William," it read. "The night we shared before the ball haunts my every waking moment. The Duke remains as oblivious and cold as ever. I fear I am carrying the consequence of our passion. You must help me." "I didn't write this!" Beatrice screamed, dropping the paper as if it were a venomous snake. "Arthur, you must believe me. This is a forgery." "Look at the ink. Look at the signature. Someone is trying to frame us." "A frame?" Arthur scoffed bitterly. "Who in God's name would want to frame a 19-year-old girl and a penniless cousin?" "No, Beatrice. William has confessed." Beatrice stopped breathing. "Confessed? To what?" "To his affair with you," Arthur said, his eyes dead. He admitted everything to Mr. Flint. He admitted he was the father. Beatrice's mind violently short-circuited. Why would William lie? Why would he claim paternity of a child that wasn't his, virtually assuring his own ruin and hers? Unless William was not trying to protect her, but destroy her. As Arthur ordered the guards to prepare a carriage to send Beatrice away to a secluded convent in France in utter disgrace, Beatrice's eyes locked onto Josiah Flint. The detective was watching her carefully, but there was something in the way he stood, something in the cold calculation of his stare, that sent a bolt of pure lightning through her brain. Flint wasn't investigating the crime. Flint had planted the letter. And if Flint had planted the letter, who had hired him to do it? Arthur wanted the truth. He wouldn't pay a detective to forge evidence against his own wife. Someone else was pulling the strings. Someone who desperately needed Beatrice out of the way. Someone who needed to ensure that Arthur Pendleton died without a legitimate heir. "Wait," Beatrice said, her voice dropping an octave, finding a spine of steel she didn't know she possessed. She looked directly at her husband. "You said doctor. Arbuthnot diagnosed you when you were 18, after your father passed away." Arthur frowned, thrown off by the sudden change in topic. "Yes." "What of it? Who stood to inherit the dukedom if you died childless, Arthur?" she asked, her voice ringing out clearly in the silent room. "Before I became pregnant, who was the sole heir to the Somerset estate?" Arthur blinked. The color slowly drained from his face as the realization hit him like a physical blow. He slowly turned his head to look at the doorway, where William Cavendish was currently being held. But Beatrice wasn't thinking of William. She was thinking of the man who had recommended Josiah Flint to Arthur in the first place. "Who recommended Mr. Flint to you, Arthur?" Beatrice demanded. Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. "Dr. Arbuthnot." The name of the esteemed physician hung in the stale air of the bedroom like a lingering poison. Dr. Arthur Pendleton stepped back, his slate-gray eyes darting blindly across the Persian rug as the tectonic plates of his entire reality began to violently shift. For 16 years, Arthur had built his life, his coldness, and his rigid, unyielding persona around the devastating truth that Dr. Arbuthnot had handed him in the dark, fever-soaked aftermath of his illness. He had believed himself broken, less than a man, a dead branch on the sprawling, ancient family tree of the Somerset dukedom. He had shut himself off from love, from warmth, from any hope of a true family, all because of the medical decree of a man he had trusted with his life. "Arbuthnot," Arthur whispered, the word tasting like ash on his tongue. He turned his gaze slowly to Josiah Flint. The private detective, usually so composed, shifted imperceptibly on his feet, his jaw tightening. It was a microscopic tell, but for a man as observant as the Duke, it was a glaring confession. "Guards," Arthur commanded, his voice eerily calm. "Seize Mr. Flint." "Now see here, Your Grace," Flint barked, reaching into his tweed coat. But the burly estate guards were faster. Within seconds, Flint was disarmed of his hidden revolver and forced to his knees, his arms twisted painfully behind his back. "Bring William here immediately," Arthur ordered the second footman. Beatrice watched, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The terrifying volcanic rage that had consumed her husband for the past week had vanished, replaced by a chilling, absolute clarity. When William Cavendish was dragged into the room moments later, his lip split and his eye already swelling with a dark purple bruise, Arthur did not yell. He walked over to his cousin and poured him a glass of water from the nightstand pitcher. "Drink," Arthur said softly, "and then tell me exactly why you confessed to ruining my whiff." William looked at the water, then at Arthur, trembling. "Arthur, I had no choice. Flint, his men intercepted me in London before I could reach you." "They didn't just find me, Arthur. They ambushed me." "Go on," Arthur urged, his voice like ice water. William swallowed hard. "Flint threatened my family. He told me that if I did not sign a full confession claiming the child was mine, he would arrange for my younger sister, Louisa, to be caught in a fabricated, devastating scandal. He had forged letters, Arthur. Letters that made it appear Louisa was selling state secrets from her husband's government office to the French. It is treason. She would have hanged. He said if I took the fall for Beatrice's child, he would burn the letters. Beatrice gasped, covering her mouth. Arthur closed his eyes, a profound, agonizing wave of regret washing over his sharp figabisau. He had almost destroyed his innocent wife and his loyal cousin over a web of spectacular lies. "I am sorry, Beatrice," Arthur murmured, his voice cracking for the first time since she had known him. He looked at her, his eyes shining with an unshed, foreign moisture. "I was blinded by my own shame, my own insecurities. I thought you had looked at my brokenness and sought comfort elsewhere." "I would never, Arthur," Beatrice whispered, stepping forward and taking his hands. They were trembling. "I told you, from the night of the masquerade, you are the only man I have ever known." Arthur squeezed her hands, drawing strength from her warmth. Then, he released her and turned his predatory gaze back to the kneeling detective. "Mr. Flint," Arthur said, pacing around the man like a wolf circling wounded prey. "You are a mercenary. You trade in secrets and silver, which means you have no loyalty to anyone but the highest bidder. So, let us talk mathematics." Flint glared up at him. "I don't know what you are implying, Your Grace." "I am implying that Dr. Arbuthnot is not acting alone," Arthur deduced, his brilliant mind connecting the scattered dots at lightning speed. "Arbuthnot is a wealthy physician, yes, but he has no claim to the Somerset title. He gains nothing by my dying without an heir. But someone else does. Someone who would gladly pay a doctor, a king's ransom, to lie to an 18-year-old boy about his fertility. Beatrice's breath hitched. Who? Arthur. My dear, destitute, utterly greedy cousin, Arthur snarled softly. Lord Percival Montgomery. If I die childless, the dukedom, the estates, the coal mines, the London properties, everything defaults to the Montgomery line. Flint remained stubbornly silent, but the sweat beading on his forehead was all the confirmation Arthur needed. Percival must have bribed Arbuthnot 16 years ago, right after my father died, Arthur continued, unraveling the horrific conspiracy aloud. They convinced me I was sterile. They ensured I would never seek a true marriage. And when I was forced to marry you, Beatrice, to save your father, they assumed I would keep my distance. But the masquerade ruined their plans. You fell pregnant. The impossible happened. The medical lie was about to be exposed. Arthur stepped directly in front of Flint, leaning down so their faces were inches apart. When they heard the rumors of your pregnancy, they panicked. Arbuthnot recommended you, Mr. Flint, to orchestrate a scandal. Frame, William, brand you a harlot. Ensure the child was declared a bastard and disinherited, preserving Percival's claim to the throne. Tell me, I am wrong, Flint. You have a vivid imagination, Your Grace, Flint spat. Arthur smiled, but it was a terrifying, hollow expression. I have more than an imagination, Mr. Flint. I have the entire fortune of the Somerset estate. Whatever Percival Montgomery is paying you, I will quintuple it. I will make you a lord in your own right, living in a villa in Tuscany. Or, Arthur nodded to the guards, I can have my men drag you down to the estate's hunting bogs. They are very deep, Mr. Flint. A man wearing heavy tweed would sink to the bottom in seconds. The choice is yours. Josiah Flint was a corrupt man, but he was not a stupid one. He looked at the unforgiving steel in the Duke's eyes, calculated his odds of survival, and promptly surrendered. Lord Montgomery is currently residing at his London townhouse, Flint confessed, his voice raspy. Dr. Arbuthnot is with him. They are waiting for my telegram confirming that the Duchess has been successfully banished and the child disinherited. Excellent, Arthur breathed. He turned to William. Cousin, are you well enough to ride? William stood up, wiping the blood from his split lip, a fierce, vengeful grin spreading across his bruised face. Try and stop me, Arthur. Good. Take 3 of my fastest horses. Ride to London and find Inspector James Caldwell of Scotland Yard. He is an honorable man who owes my family his career. Tell him everything. Then, gather a dozen of his finest men. Arthur turned to Beatrice, his expression softening entirely. He reached out, his gloved hand resting gently over her slightly rounded stomach. The child. His child. The overwhelming reality of it finally crashed over him, washing away 16 years of bitter solitude. Beatrice, he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. I will make this right. I will tear down the men who tried to steal our future. What are you going to do? She asked, clinging to his lapels. I am going to throw a dinner party, Arthur replied, his eyes gleaming with dark intent. And I am going to serve them a dish they will never forget. 3 days later, a heavy, oppressive fog rolled over the sprawling grounds of Oakhaven Manor, cloaking the estate in a shroud of Gothic mystery. A black carriage, adorned with the Montgomery crest, rattled up the gravel driveway, halting before the towering oak doors. Out stepped Lord Percival Montgomery, a thin, reedy man with a permanent sneer and a wardrobe that smelled faintly of mothballs and desperation. Behind him emerged Dr. Phineas Arbuthnot, plump, immaculately dressed in a tailored frock coat, carrying his black medical bag with an air of absolute superiority. They had received a frantic, desperately worded telegram from Arthur the previous day. It claimed his heart was failing under the immense stress of his wife's treason. He had summoned them to finalize his will, officially disinheriting the unborn child and naming Percival as his sole heir before his supposed imminent demise. They were escorted into the cavernous dining room. The atmosphere was incredibly somber. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, and the only light came from the flickering silver candelabras. Arthur sat at the head of the long mahogany table, slumped in his chair, a woolen blanket draped over his shoulders. He looked pale, exhausted, and thoroughly defeated. "My dear cousin," Percival cooed, practically vibrating with suppressed glee as he took a seat near Arthur. "This is a tragic day. But fear not. The Montgomery line will honor the Somerset legacy with the utmost respect." Dr. Arbuthnot moved to Arthur's side, pressing 2 fingers to the Duke's neck. "Your pulse is erratic, Your Grace. The shock of the Duchess's betrayal has clearly taken a severe toll on your constitution. It is a mercy she has been sent away." Arthur coughed weakly, his eyes half closed. "Yes, the betrayal. It is a heavy burden, Doctor. Tell me, how long have I been carrying the burden of my brokenness?" "Since the fever, Your Grace," Arbuthnot replied smoothly, patting Arthur's shoulder with practiced sympathy. 16 years. You have borne your medical misfortune with the dignity of a true nobleman." 16 years, Arthur repeated softly. He slowly pushed the woolen blanket off his shoulders. He sat up straighter. The false pallor on his face, carefully applied flower by Clara Higgins, seemed to vanish as the terrifying, commanding presence of the Duke of Somerset flooded back into the room. Arthur reached for a new Bohemian crystal glass, resting by his plate. He poured himself a measure of dark ruby port, his hand perfectly steady. "It is fascinating, Doctor," Arthur said, his voice no longer weak, but echoing with a lethal metallic resonance. "I have spent 16 years believing I was a barren wasteland. Yet, when I looked upon the face of the man who supposedly ruined my wife, I saw only a terrified pawn." Percival's sneer faltered. He exchanged a quick, nervous glance with Arbuthnot. "Arthur, what are you talking about? Has the fever returned to your brain? Where is the solicitor with the new will?" "There is no will, Percival," Arthur stated flatly. He took a sip of his port. "And there is no banishment." Right on cue, the heavy oak doors at the back of the dining room swung open. Beatrice walked in, radiant and regal, wearing a gown of emerald green silk that proudly highlighted the curve of her pregnancy. Beside her walked William Cavendish, looking battered but fiercely triumphant. Percival leaped to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "What is the meaning of this? Why is this harlot still in this house?" "Careful, cousin," Arthur warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are speaking of the Duchess of Somerset, and the mother of my child." Dr. Arbuthnot's face drained of all color. He backed away from the table, clutching his medical bag. "Your Grace, you are delusional. The child cannot be yours. You are sterile." "I diagnosed you myself." "Yes, you did," Arthur agreed, standing up. "You looked an 18-year-old boy in the eye, a boy mourning his dead father, and you condemned him to a lifetime of loneliness. For what, Arbuthnot? How much did Percival pay you to falsify my medical records? £10,000? 20? This is slander," Arbuthnot sputtered, sweating profusely. "I am a respected man of science." "You are a butcher in a tailored suit," Arthur roared. From the shadows of the room, Inspector James Caldwell of Scotland Yard stepped forward, flanked by 4 uniformed constables. In Caldwell's hand was a thick, leather-bound ledger. "Dr. Phineas Arbuthnot," Inspector Caldwell announced, his voice booming through the room. "Lord William Cavendish and a dozen of my men paid a visit to your private London residence this morning. We found a hidden safe in your study." Inside was a ledger detailing a massive, continuous influx of funds from the accounts of Lord Percival Montgomery over the past 16 years, labeled under Somerset Retainer. "We also found a signed contract between you and Lord Montgomery, promising you an estate in Surrey upon his ascension to the dukedom. Percival Montgomery collapsed back into his chair, his hands shaking violently as he realized the magnitude of his ruin. The long game he had played for nearly 2 decades had just violently imploded. Arbuthnot tried to make a run for the servants' door, but William Cavendish stepped in front of him, delivering a single, satisfying punch to the doctor's jaw that sent the physician crashing into a serving cart, bringing down a mountain of silverware. Lord Percival Montgomery, Dr. Phineas Arbuthnot, Inspector Caldwell continued, signaling his men to apply the iron cuffs. You are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, forgery, and attempted treason against a peer of the realm. You will both stand trial. And I suspect you will both hang. As the constables dragged the screaming, sobbing men out of the dining room, the suffocating darkness that had haunted Oakhaven Manor for 16 long years seemed to finally lift. The silence that followed was not the icy, miserable quiet of the past, but a warm, breathing peace. Arthur stood by the table, staring at the empty chairs. He slowly turned to Beatrice. The mask of the stoic, unfeeling Duke was gone entirely. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into a desperate, crushing embrace. "It's over," he whispered into her auburn hair, tears finally spilling over his eyelashes and soaking into the shoulder of her silk gown. "The lie is dead, Beatrice. We are free." Beatrice wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, burying her face in his chest, crying tears of sheer relief. "We are going to have a family, Arthur." "A family," he repeated, pulling back to frame her face with his hands, looking at her with an adoration that bordered on worship. "You saved me, Beatrice. You brought light into a tomb. I swear to you, for as long as I live, you and this child will know nothing but my love." 7 months later, as the first snows of winter began to blanket the sprawling lawns of Oakhaven Manor, the estate was filled with a sound it had not heard in a generation. It was not the shattering of Bohemian crystal, nor the shouting of angry men. It was the strong, healthy, demanding cry of a newborn baby boy. Edward Henry Pendleton, the new heir to the Somerset dukedom, was born perfectly healthy, with his mother's bright eyes and his father's dark hair. Dr. Arbuthnot and Percival Montgomery had been stripped of their titles, their wealth seized, and were rotting in the damp cells of Newgate Prison, awaiting the gallows. Josiah Flint, having turned King's evidence, had vanished into the obscurity of the continent, never to be seen in London society again. Arthur Pendleton, holding his tiny swaddled son by the roaring fire of his private study, looked down at the peaceful face of his wife sleeping in the armchair beside him. He gently brushed a knuckle against his son's cheek, marveling at the impossible, beautiful reality of his life. The Duke, who could not have children, was dead. In his place stood a father, completely whole, completely healed, and completely in love. And that brings us to the breathtaking, triumphant end of the Duke and Duchess of Somerset's incredible true story. It goes to show that even the most meticulously planned conspiracies can be unraveled by the sheer power of truth and a mother's unyielding determination. Arthur and Beatrice's journey from a cold, arranged marriage to a fiercely loyal, loving family remains one of the most remarkable turnarounds in high society history. If this deep dive into historical scandal, betrayal, and ultimate redemption kept you on the edge of your seat, please smash that like button. It lets us know you want more content exactly like this. Share this incredible story with your friends, and make sure to subscribe to Timeless Whispers so you never miss out on the hidden dramas of the past. Drop a comment below on what shocked you the most, and we'll see you in the next video.